Sometimes the loneliest people have the biggest hearts. Sometimes one simple act of kindness can change everything forever. In the forgotten corner of the West, where the railroad never came, Harlan Tate sat on the porch of his empty shack. The old cowboy had nothing left, no wife, no children, no future, just pride and a crust of cornbread. When a starving wolf appeared at dusk, most men would have reached for a rifle. Harlan reached for his last meal instead. The wolf took it gently and disappeared into the hills. But the next morning something impossible happened. Animals began arriving, rabbits, deer, foxes, even a bear, all waiting peacefully as if summoned by something ancient. Why did they come? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Mercy Springs, New Mexico had been dying since 1952. The year the railroad chose a route 40 miles north and left the town to fade like an old photograph. The buildings along Main Street still stood, but barely. The hardware store kept hours 3 days a week. The diner opened when Mary Hutchins felt up to it. The post office shared space with what used to be a bank. Tumbleweeds collected against chain-link fences, and the wind carried dust that settled on everything like a shroud. Harlan Tate had watched it all happen. 67 years old now, weathered like the buildings around him, he'd been here long enough to remember when Mercy Springs hummed with life. When the Saturday dances filled the community hall. When children played in streets that now stood empty. When hope wasn't just a word people used before changing the subject. His shack sat at the eastern edge of town, where the desert proper began its long stretch toward nothing. 3 acres of scrubland, a wooden structure that leaked when it rained, and a porch that tilted just enough to make strangers nervous. Harlan didn't mind the tilt. He'd gotten used to things not being quite level anymore. The shack had been full once. For 40 years, Ruth had made it a home. Her quilts on the furniture, her herb garden out back, her laughter filling rooms that now held only echoes and dust. She'd been the kind of woman who could make a house feel warm just by being in it, who could take nothing and turn it into something worth having. They'd been 19 when they married, both of them poor as dirt, but rich in the ways that mattered. They'd worked the old Brennan ranch together, Harlan breaking horses and mending fences while Ruth kept the books and tended the animals. The ranch was gone now, sold off piece by piece after old man Brennan died and his children scattered to cities back east. But for 3 decades it had been good work, hard work, the kind that left you bone-tired but satisfied, the kind that made you sleep deep and wake grateful. They'd wanted children. Lord, how they'd wanted them. Ruth had miscarried twice in their 20s. After the second time, the doctor in Albuquerque said it probably wouldn't happen. They'd grieved that loss in private, the way people did in those days, and then they'd gotten on with living, made their peace with it, poured their love into each other, into the land, into the animals they tended. It had been enough. It had been more than enough. The cancer came 3 years ago, pancreatic. By the time they caught it, there wasn't much to be done except make her comfortable. The medical bills took everything. The small savings, Harlan's truck, the few pieces of jewelry Ruth's mother had left her. Everything except the wedding ring. Ruth had made him promise to keep that. "So you remember," she'd said, her voice already thin as paper. "So you remember we had something good." He'd held her hand in that hospital room and watched the woman he loved disappear by degrees. The sharp mind that had balanced ranch books went fuzzy. The hands that had quilted and gardened and touched his face with such tenderness grew still. In the end, she'd looked at him with eyes that still held all their love and whispered, "You're meant for something gentle, my love. Something kind. Don't forget that." She died on a Tuesday morning in April, with the spring sun coming through the window and his hand still holding hers. Harlan had sat there for an hour afterward, unable to let go, unable to accept that the warmth was leaving her fingers and he couldn't stop it. The funeral had been well attended. Ruth had been loved. But afterward, people went back to their lives, and Harlan went back to the shack that wasn't a home anymore. Just walls and a roof and too much quiet. He'd tried to work, but at 64, with a bad knee and arthritis in his hands, nobody needed him. The pension from his ranch work wasn't much. barely 300 a month. Social Security wouldn't kick in for another year. He got by on beans and rice. On charity he pretended not to notice. When Mary from the diner sent home extra portions, on pride that was becoming harder to swallow than the food. The shack deteriorated around him. Shingles blew off in windstorms. The porch steps rotted. The screens tore. Harlan fixed what he could, but there was only so much a man could do with no money and failing strength. He'd thought about selling, but who would buy? And where would he go? This was home, such as it was. Ruth was buried in the cemetery on the hill. He couldn't leave her. Most days followed the same pattern. Wake before dawn out of habit, though there was nothing that needed doing. Make coffee on the old stove that sometimes worked. Sit on the tilted porch and watch the sun come up over land that looked the same as it had 100 years ago. Dust and scrub and sky. Beautiful in its own way, if you had the eyes to see it. Ruth had seen it. She'd loved the mornings, the way the light turned everything gold. The townspeople were kind in their way. Mrs. Chen at the general store let him run a tab she probably knew he'd never pay off. Sheriff Brunson checked on him once a week, pretending it was part of his rounds. Elena Martinez, who cleaned houses in Albuquerque and commuted an hour each way, sometimes dropped off a plate of tamales with a smile and a lie about having made too many. Harlan accepted these kindnesses because refusing them would have been cruel. But it hurt every time. He'd been a man who worked for what he had. Now he was a man who survived on charity. The wedding ring hung on a chain around his neck, tucked under his shirt where no one could see. He touched it sometimes, feeling the worn gold that had circled Ruth's finger for 4 decades. It was all he had left of their life together. That and memories that grew more precious and more painful with each passing day. He'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. His clothes hung loose. His face, already lean, had gone gaunt. Doc Henderson had pulled him aside at the post office 2 months back and said quietly, "Harlan, you're not eating enough. I know times are hard, but you've got to take care of yourself." Harlan had nodded and said he would, but they both knew he was lying. The truth was, Harlan was tired. Tired of being old and poor and alone. Tired of waking up to empty rooms. Tired of the pity he saw in people's eyes. He wasn't suicidal. He'd seen enough death in Vietnam to know how precious life was, how quickly it could be taken. But he wasn't particularly invested in holding on either. If his time came, he wouldn't fight it. Maybe he'd see Ruth again. Maybe not. Either way, the loneliness would end. That evening in late March was like most others. The sun hung low and red, painting the desert in shades of rust and amber. Harlan sat in his chair on the porch, the one Ruth used to sit in next to him, empty and dusty. He had one thing left in the kitchen, half a piece of cornbread he'd made 2 days ago. It wasn't much, but it would be dinner. Maybe breakfast too, if he split it right. He was trying to decide whether to eat it now or later when the wolf appeared. It came from the east, moving slow across the scrubland. Even from a distance, Harlan could see it was in bad shape. Thin to the point of starvation, one leg carrying unevenly, probably injured. The wolf stopped about 20 yards from the porch, close enough for Harlan to see its ribs through the matted fur, the wariness in its yellow eyes. They regarded each other for a long moment. Harlan knew he should probably go inside, or at least be cautious. Wolves were rare this far south anymore, and a starving one could be desperate enough to attack. But something in the animal's gaze stopped him. Not aggression, just exhaustion, just hunger. Just the same tired desperation Harlan saw in his own mirror every morning. He thought about Ruth. She'd always had a soft spot for animals. Fed every stray cat that came around, nursed birds with broken wings, cried when the ranch dogs died of old age. "They're innocent," she used to say. "They don't know cruelty or meanness. They just want to live." Harlan stood slowly, joints protesting. Went inside to the kitchen, where the cornbread sat on a chipped plate. Picked it up and looked at it. His dinner, maybe his breakfast. The only food in the house until he could get to the store. And that wouldn't be until he figured out how to pay Mrs. Chen something on his tab. He looked at the cornbread. Looked out the window at the wolf, still standing there, still watching. "Ah, hell," he muttered. He went back outside, moving slow so as not to spook the animal. The wolf tensed but didn't run. Harlan broke the cornbread in half. The smaller half he set on the porch rail. The other half he tossed gently toward the wolf, letting it land in the dust about 10 feet from where the animal stood. "Ain't much," Harlan said, his voice rough from disuse. "But it's half of what I got. Seems only fair to share." The wolf approached the cornbread cautiously, sniffed it, then took it in its jaws with a gentleness that surprised him. It didn't devour the food in desperate gulps. Instead, it held Harlan's gaze for a moment that stretched longer than it should have. Some recognition passed between them, two creatures at the end of their rope, finding a moment of grace in each other's company. Then the wolf turned and loped back toward the hills, the cornbread carried carefully in its mouth. Within minutes, it had vanished into the gathering dusk. Harlan stood on his porch as darkness fell, went inside and ate his half of the cornbread slowly, making it last. It tasted better than it had any right to, and he couldn't say exactly why. He touched Ruth's ring through his shirt. "Probably a foolish thing to do," he said to the empty room. "But you'd have done the same." He thought he could almost hear her laugh, that bright sound that used to fill the spaces between his heartbeats. That night, Harlan went to sleep hungry, but somehow more at peace than he'd been in months. He didn't know why, didn't question it, just accepted it as one of those strange graces that sometimes appeared when you least expected them. He had no idea that his world was about to change in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. No idea that the simple act of sharing his last meal would ripple outward into something larger than one man, one wolf, one moment of kindness in a dying town at the edge of nowhere. Sometimes the smallest gestures cast the longest shadows. Sometimes the quietest moments are the ones that echo the loudest. Harlan slept deeply that night, and for the first time since Ruth died, he didn't dream of loss. He dreamed of golden light and gentle hands, and a voice saying, "That's my good man. That's my kind man." When he woke the next morning, everything would be different. Dawn came soft and pink, the kind of morning Ruth had loved. Harlan woke with his stomach cramping from hunger, but his spirit oddly light. He dressed slowly, splashed water on his face from the basin, and made his way to the front door with the vague intention of sitting on the porch and watching the day begin. He opened the door and stopped. A rabbit sat on the top porch step, 3 feet from where Harlan stood. It didn't bolt at his appearance, didn't even twitch. Just sat there, perfectly still, dark eyes watching him with an alertness that seemed almost deliberate. Harlan blinked, stood there trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Rabbits didn't do this. They ran. That was their nature. Yet this one remained, calm as could be, as if it had been waiting for him. "Well," Harlan said softly. "Good morning to you, too." The rabbit's nose twitched, but it didn't move. Harlan's eye caught something else. In the yard, maybe 20 feet from the porch, 2 mule deer stood motionless. A doe and a younger one, perhaps last year's fawn. They too were watching him, ears forward, bodies relaxed in a way that deer never were around humans. The hunger in Harlan's stomach turned to something else. Not fear exactly, but a prickling awareness that something unusual was happening. Something beyond his understanding. He stepped carefully past the rabbit, which still didn't move, and walked to the edge of the porch. The deer didn't flee. The rabbit stayed put. And now, as his eyes adjusted to the growing light, he saw more. A red fox near the fence line, sitting on its haunches like a dog. 3 more rabbits, scattered across the scrubland. A raccoon by the dried-up water. Trough. What looked like a possum under the juniper tree, a pair of ground squirrels, all of them still, all of them watching. None of them showing the slightest fear or aggression, not toward him and not toward each other. The fox sat 15 feet from the rabbits, and the rabbits showed no concern. The deer grazed peacefully in the presence of predators. Everything was wrong, and yet nothing felt threatening. Harlan stood there, trying to make his mind work properly, trying to find a logical explanation. Maybe they were sick. Rabies could make animals lose their fear. But rabid animals were erratic, aggressive. These creatures were calm, almost serene. And there were so many of them. Rubies didn't work that way. He looked down at the porch boards and saw it then, a paw print in the dust that had collected near the steps. Larger than a coyote's, the distinctive four-toed print of a wolf. The same wolf he'd fed last night. It had returned while he slept, had come right up to the porch. "What did you do?" Harlan whispered to the print. "What did you tell them?" As if in answer, more animals appeared throughout the morning. By the time the sun had fully risen, Harlan counted at least 20 visible creatures, with more arriving every hour. They came from the desert, from the direction of the hills, from the scrubland. They arrived singly and in pairs, moving without hurry, and once they reached his property they stopped and settled. Mrs. Chen was the first person to notice. She drove past on her way to open the general store and nearly ran off the road. By 9 o'clock, she was standing at a safe distance from Harlan's property with Sheriff Wade Brunson, both of them staring at the gathering animals with expressions of pure bewilderment. "Harlan," the sheriff called out, "you seeing this?" "I'm seeing it," Harlan called back. "Don't mean I understand it. They dangerous." Mrs. Chen asked, her voice carrying across the morning air. "Haven't shown a lick of aggression," Harlan said. "Been here since dawn, just sitting, just watching." By noon, a small crowd had gathered on the road. Word spread through Mercy Springs the way word always spread in small towns, quickly and with embellishment. People came to look, to point, to offer theories that ranged from reasonable to ridiculous. Some thought maybe there'd been a chemical spill that affected the animals' behavior. Others figured the drought had driven them to seek water, even though Harlan's property was as dry as everywhere else. A few of the older folks went quiet and thoughtful, remembering stories from their grandparents about strange happenings on this land. Back before the town existed, Sheriff Brunson, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s who'd kept the peace in Mercy Springs for going on 20 years, approached Harlan's property with the careful steps of someone who didn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Mind if I come up?" he asked. "Come ahead," Harlan said. "Don't think they'll bother you." The sheriff walked through the animals like a man wading through a stream. The rabbits moved aside to let him pass but didn't flee. The deer watched him with mild interest. The fox yawned. It was the strangest thing Brunson had ever seen in 2 decades of law enforcement. And that included the time Harold Peterson tried to drive his tractor through the diner after a dispute about pie. "Harlan," Brunson said, reaching the porch, "what in God's name is happening here?" "I fed a wolf last night," Harlan said simply. "Had some cornbread." Wolf looked hungry. "I shared." Brunson stared at him. "That's it?" "That's it. You feed a wolf, and now every animal in 3 counties is camping out in your yard." "Appears so." Brunson took off his hat and ran a hand through his thinning hair. "I need to call somebody. Wildlife management or something. This ain't natural." "No," Harlan agreed. "It ain't, but they're not hurting anyone. Seems to me we ought to just let it be for now." More animals arrived throughout the afternoon. Coyotes, remarkably. More deer, another fox. What looked suspiciously like a small bobcat. And birds, dozens of them perching on the fence, on the porch rail, on the roof of the shack. Ravens and crows, hawks and sparrows, all sitting together in impossible proximity. The crowd on the road grew. People from neighboring towns drove over to see for themselves. A reporter from the Albuquerque paper showed up with a camera. Someone called a local TV station. By evening, Harlan's quiet patch of scrubland had become something between a circus and a pilgrimage site. Through it all, Harlan sat on his porch, overwhelmed and uncertain. He'd done one small thing, shared his last meal with a starving animal, and somehow it had grown into this. He couldn't explain it, didn't know how to process it. All he knew was that animals kept coming, drawn by something he couldn't see or understand. A young boy pushed through the crowd, maybe 10 years old, with dark hair and wide eyes full of wonder. His mother chased after him, calling, "Tommy! Tommy, get back here!" But Tommy had already reached the edge of Harlan's property and stood there, staring at a rabbit that had hopped right up to him and sat at his feet. "It's magic," the boy breathed. "It's real magic." His mother, Elena Martinez, Harlan recognized her from the tamales she'd brought, reached her son and froze when she saw the rabbit. Saw all the animals, saw the impossible peace that hung over the land like morning mist. "Madre de Dios," she whispered. Tommy looked back at Harlan with shining eyes. "Did you do this, Mr. Tate?" Are you magic? Harlan's throat tightened. No, son. I'm just an old man who fed a hungry wolf. Whatever this is, it's something beyond me. As sunset approached, the animals showed no signs of leaving. They settled in, some sleeping, some watching, all maintaining that eerie calm. The crowd finally dispersed, heading home for dinner and to spread the story further. Sheriff Brunson promised to return in the morning to figure out what to do. Elena Martinez lingered, Tommy at her side. "Mr. Tate," she said softly, "whatever is happening, I think it's something good." "Tommy," her voice caught. "Tommy hasn't smiled like this in a year, not since his father left. He comes home from school and sits in his room. But today he's alive again. So thank you. For whatever this is, thank you." She took her son's hand and led him away, the boy looking back over his shoulder at the animals, at Harlan, at the impossible made real. Night fell. The crowd finally gone. Harlan sat alone with his thoughts and the animals. The temperature dropped as it always did in the desert after dark, and he pulled his worn jacket tighter. The wolf appeared at the edge of the property line, just as the last light faded from the sky. Harlan saw it immediately, that familiar shape against the darkening east. The wolf sat and looked at him across the distance. Even in the dimness, Harlan could see its eyes, could feel the weight of its gaze. "You did this," Harlan said, not sure if he was asking or accusing. "You brought them." The wolf didn't move, didn't respond. But Harlan felt something pass between them, some understanding that transcended words. This was gratitude, perhaps, or recognition, or a debt being repaid in a language older than speech. After a long moment, the wolf stood and melted back into the night. But the other animals remained, dozens of them now, surrounding Harlan's shack in a circle of peaceful presence. Harlan touched Ruth's ring through his shirt. "I don't understand this," he said to her memory. "I don't understand any of it. But you said I was meant for something kind. Maybe this is it. Maybe this is what you saw." He went inside and tried to sleep, but rest came hard. His mind spun with questions that had no answers. Outside, the animals kept their vigil, and somewhere in the darkness, a wolf watched over them all 3 days. That's how long it took for Harlan's quiet life to become completely unrecognizable. The animals had stayed, their numbers growing. By the third morning, Harlan counted more than 50 distinct creatures occupying his property and the surrounding scrubland. The natural order of predator and prey had suspended itself entirely. Coyotes dozed near rabbits. Hawks perched alongside mourning doves. A young mountain lion had arrived during the night and settled peacefully among the deer. It defied every law of nature, and yet there it was, happening right in front of everyone's eyes. The story had spread beyond Mercy Springs, beyond Albuquerque, beyond New Mexico. Cable news picked it up as a curiosity piece. Social media exploded with videos and photographs. Scientists and researchers from 3 universities descended on the town. And the reporters, Lord, the reporters came in droves. They set up camps along the road. They knocked on Harlan's door at all hours. They shouted questions across his property. They wanted interviews, exclusive stories, explanations he didn't have and couldn't give. Harlan refused most of them. He wasn't a man comfortable with attention. His whole life, he'd preferred to work quietly, to exist in the background. Now he was being treated like some kind of prophet or miracle worker, and it made his skin crawl. But one reporter managed to get through to him, and only because she had a connection he couldn't ignore. Sarah Chen was Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, in her late 20s, working for a public radio station in Santa Fe. She'd grown up hearing stories about Mercy Springs from her grandmother, and she approached Harlan with respect rather than hunger for a sensational story. "Mr. Tate," she'd said, standing at the edge of his porch while animals milled peacefully in the background. "My grandmother speaks highly of you, says you've lived here your whole life, that you're a good man who's fallen on hard times. I'd like to tell your story properly if you'll let me. Not the circus version everyone else wants. The real version." Something in her tone reminded Harlan of Ruth, that same directness mixed with kindness. He'd invited her up, offered her water he couldn't really spare, and talked to her for an hour about his life, about Ruth, about the wolf and the cornbread. "I didn't do it for recognition," he'd told her. I did it because I was hungry and the wolf was hungry, and it seemed right to share. That's all. Sometimes, Sarah had said gently, the purest acts are the ones done without thought of reward. Her story aired that night on the radio, spreading across public broadcasting networks. Unlike the breathless TV reports that focused on the spectacle, Sarah's piece was measured and thoughtful. She spoke of poverty in dying towns, of loneliness and loss, of one man's simple act of compassion. She didn't sensationalize the mystery of the animals. She just let it exist as what it was, unexplained, beautiful, impossible. The response was immediate. Donations started coming in. People from across the country sent money, food, supplies. Some included letters. Thank you for reminding us that kindness still matters. Your story gave me hope. God bless you, sir, for showing us what a good man looks like. Harlan was overwhelmed. He tried to refuse the donations, but Sheriff Brunson convinced him to at least accept the food. These animals need feeding, Brunson pointed out. You can't do that on $300 a month. Let people help. So Harlan accepted, but only to buy feed for the animals. Bags of grain, vegetables, scraps from the diner. He rationed it carefully, making sure every creature that had come to him got something. His own portions remained small, but watching the animals eat gave him a satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. The scientists arrived next. Dr. Patricia Reeves, from the University of New Mexico's biology department, came with 2 graduate students and enough equipment to stock a small lab. They wanted to observe, to take samples, to understand what they were calling the Mercy Springs phenomenon. This behavior is unprecedented, Dr. Reeves explained to Harlan. Natural predator-prey dynamics don't simply cease. Something is overriding their fundamental instincts. We need to understand what. They're not here to be poked and prodded, Harlan said firmly. I won't have them stressed or harmed. We would only observe. Observing is fine. Anything more, you can move along. Dr. Reeves wasn't used to being told no, but something in Harlan's tone made it clear the discussion was over. She and her students set up observation posts at a respectful distance, taking notes and photographs, their bafflement growing with each passing hour. Every test, every measurement, every analysis came back, showing perfectly healthy animals, displaying absolutely impossible behavior. The town of Mercy Springs itself had transformed. The reporters and researchers needed places to stay, meals to eat. The diner started opening 7 days a week. Mrs. Chen's general store had its best month in a decade. Even the old motel on the highway, closed for 5 years, reopened under new management. Money flowed into the dying town like water into cracked earth. Mayor Tom Hendricks, a portly man who ran the feed store and had won his position mostly because no one else wanted it, suddenly saw possibilities he'd never imagined. This could save us, he told anyone who'd listen. Put Mercy Springs on the map. Tourist destination, historical site, economic development opportunity. Not everyone was happy about it. Old-timers like Frank Morrison, who'd ranched in the area for 60 years, grumbled about outsiders and disruption. It's not natural, he said to anyone who'd listen. Something's wrong with those animals. Mark my words, this won't end well. But others saw something different. Saw hope where there'd been none. Saw purpose in a town that had been dying by degrees. Tommy Martinez became a regular visitor. His mother would drop him off after school, and the boy would sit on Harlan's porch, helping feed the animals, asking endless questions about nature and kindness and magic. Harlan found himself opening up in ways he hadn't since Ruth died, sharing stories about the ranch, about Vietnam, about the lessons life had taught him. My dad left because he said there was nothing here, Tommy told Harlan one afternoon. But there is something here. This is something. Your daddy was looking for the wrong kind of something, Harlan said gently. Sometimes the best things are the quiet ones. The ones that don't shout. The town council called a meeting to discuss the situation. Harlan attended reluctantly, uncomfortable in the crowded community hall where so many eyes fixed on him, with expressions ranging from gratitude to resentment to outright suspicion. Mayor Hendricks spoke first, outlining plans for managing the increased attention. We need to think about infrastructure, about how we handle visitors, about—" Tommy stood up from where he sat with his mother. "He did a good thing," the boy said, his voice clear in the crowded room. "Mr. Tate did a good thing, and now something amazing is happening. Why can't we just let it be good? Why do we have to turn it into something else?" Silence followed. Elena put her hand on her son's shoulder, her eyes shining with tears. Harlan felt something shift in his chest. This boy, with his fierce defense and his simple faith, reminded him of what mattered. Not the attention, not the money, not the analysis and theories, just the basic truth that kindness had consequences, that good acts rippled outward in ways you couldn't predict or control. The meeting ended without real resolution. The council was divided, the town was divided, but for now, the animals remained, and Harlan remained their reluctant guardian. That night, alone on his porch, with 50-plus animals sleeping peacefully around him, Harlan looked at the stars and remembered Ruth's words. "You're meant for something gentle, my love. I'm trying," he said to the darkness. "I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying." A black bear had arrived that afternoon, massive and calm, and settled near the fence. Its presence had sent waves of shock through the observers, but the animal showed no aggression. It simply was part of the impossible gathering. Harlan understood then, with a clarity that settled into his bones. This wasn't about him. He was just the catalyst, the spark. Whatever was happening here was older and larger than one man's act of kindness. He'd simply been the one present at the right moment, hungry enough and broken enough to make the choice that opened whatever door had needed opening. "All right then," he said to the sleeping animals, to the night, to Ruth's memory. "All right. I'll see it through." And somewhere in the hills, a wolf's howl rose and fell, carrying across the darkness like a promise or a benediction. The hunting rifle had been hanging above Harlan's door for 3 years, untouched since the day after Ruth's funeral. It was a Winchester model 1894, passed down from his father, well-maintained but unloaded. Harlan looked at it sometimes and remembered easier times when providing meat for the table was a matter of skill and patience, not morality. He hadn't touched it since Ruth died. Had no reason to. But now, with nearly 100 animals gathered on his property, several people had suggested, some politely, some less so, that he might want to keep it handy. Jake Cordell arrived during the 2nd week, driving a pristine pickup truck that cost more than Harlan had made in 5 years of ranch work. He was a hunting outfitter from Montana, tall and tanned, wearing clothes that looked expensive in that deliberate, rugged way that had nothing to do with actual work. "Mr. Tate," Cordell said, extending a hand that Harlan didn't take. "I represent a consortium of outdoor recreation businesses. We'd like to discuss a partnership opportunity." "Not interested," Harlan said from his porch. Cordell smiled like he hadn't heard. "You haven't heard the proposal yet. We're talking about guided viewing experiences. Wealthy clients pay premium prices to observe wildlife in natural settings. You've got the most unique wildlife situation in North America right here. We could make you a very comfortable man, Mr. Tate." "Animals aren't attractions," Harlan said. "They're guests. Guests who are costing you money to feed," Cordell pointed out. "Money you don't have. We're offering a solution that benefits everyone. Everyone but the animals." Cordell's smile hardened slightly. "Mr. Tate, let's be realistic. This situation isn't sustainable. These animals will eventually leave or something will happen. You might as well benefit while you can." "You done?" Harlan asked. "I'm trying to help you see reason." "Then I'm done listening. Get off my property." Cordell's expression shifted, calculation replacing false friendliness. "You know, there are other opportunities here too. Hunting opportunities. Some of my clients would pay 6 figures for a chance at that mountain lion, the black bear. Premium trophies in a controlled environment." Harlan stood slowly, every joint protesting, but his spine straight. "You're talking about killing them, on my land. After they came here trusting there'd be no harm. I'm talking about economics. Mr. Tate, about not being stupid with an opportunity. Get off my property." Something in Harlan's voice, something from Vietnam, from years of hard choices and harder consequences, made Cordell take a step back. "You're making a mistake," he said. "A very expensive mistake." He left, but Harlan knew it wouldn't be the last attempt. Money had a way of making people persistent and desperate. The very next day, Martin Reeves arrived. He was everything Cordell wasn't: soft-spoken, professional, wearing a modest suit that still somehow conveyed wealth. He represented a Colorado-based development firm, and his pitch was smoother, more refined. "Mr. Tate, I understand you love this land. I respect that. What we're proposing isn't exploitation, it's preservation through sustainable development." He unrolled architectural plans on Harlan's porch table. "The Mercy Springs Wildlife Experience Center, educational facility, research station, gift shop, small hotel. We'd preserve the core 2 acres where the animals gather, build around it respectfully. You'd retain lifetime residence rights. And we'd pay you $200,000. Harlan looked at the plans without touching them. $200,000. More money than he'd seen in his entire life. Money that could buy comfort, security, medical care. Money that could change everything. "No," he said. Reeves blinked. "Mr. Tate, perhaps you didn't hear the amount I heard." "Answer's still no. I could go to $350,000. That's my absolute ceiling." Harlan met his eyes. "This isn't about money. These animals didn't come here to be put in a zoo. They came because—" He stopped, not sure how to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. "They came because kindness still means something. I won't sell that." Reeves's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing frustration underneath. "Mr. Tate, be reasonable. This opportunity won't last forever. The animals will leave. The attention will fade. You'll be left with nothing again. Then I'll be left with nothing," Harlan said. "It won't be the first time." After Reeves left, Harlan sat on his porch and felt the weight of his choice. He'd just turned down enough money to live comfortably for the rest of his life. Money that could have fixed the shack, paid medical bills, ensured he didn't die in poverty, but the animals were there, peaceful and trusting. The mountain lion dozed in the shade. The bear watched clouds drift overhead. The rabbits played gently with each other. They'd come to him, chosen him somehow, and selling them felt like a betrayal worse than any poverty. Sheriff Brunson stopped by that evening. He sat on the porch steps, hat in his hands, and said quietly, "Heard about your visitors. Heard about the offers? News travels," Harlan said. "Town's divided, Harlan. Some folks think you should take the money. Say it could save Mercy Springs, bring jobs and opportunity. Others," he paused, "others are grateful you're standing firm. But the pressure's going to get worse. I can handle pressure." Brunson looked at him with an expression Harlan couldn't quite read. "Did you know I served in the Army? 20 years before I came back and took up this badge. I didn't. I know you served too. Vietnam, did some asking around." "You don't talk about it," Harlan said nothing. "What I heard," Brunson continued, "is that you earned a Purple Heart, that you saw things no man should see, that you came home and chose peace, chose to work with animals and land instead of what the war wanted you to be." He stood, putting his hat back on. "Some men know violence, Harlan, but knowing it and choosing to walk away takes more strength than using it. These people pressuring you, they don't understand that kind of strength. But I do." After Brunson left, Harlan looked up at the rifle above his door. It gleamed dully in the evening light, familiar and foreign at once. He thought about Vietnam, about the weight of an M16 in his hands, about decisions made in jungles half a world away that still sometimes woke him in the night. He'd chosen peace after that. Chosen Ruth, chosen ranch work, chosen a life where the only things he killed were for sustenance, never for sport or profit or anger. The rifle above his door was a tool, not a weapon. He'd kept that distinction clear for 40 years. Late that night, drunk voices woke him. Harlan looked out to see 3 men at the edge of his property, hunters by the look of their gear. One was Frank Morrison's nephew, Craig, known for causing trouble when he drank. "Just gonna scatter 'em," Craig was saying loud enough to carry. "End this nonsense. Town's going crazy over some animals and a crazy old man." They started forward. The animals stirred, restless. Then, in a movement that made Harlan's breath catch, they shifted, drew together. formed a protective circle around the shack with a coordination that was absolutely impossible for wild creatures. The hunters stopped, suddenly uncertain. The mountain lion stood and stretched. The bear rose to its full height. The coyotes arranged themselves in a loose line, not aggressive but present, watchful, together. Craig and his friends stumbled backward, fear sobering them faster than coffee ever could. They moved like they were one thing, one of them stammered. They fled to their truck and drove away fast, leaving dust and tire tracks. Harlan stood on his porch watching the animals settle back into their places. They'd protected him, protected themselves, moved with a unity that transcended individual will or instinct. He looked up at the rifle again, reached up and touched the cool metal, then left it where it was. "Not that way," he said quietly. "Not ever again." That night, he lay in bed touching Ruth's ring through his shirt and thinking about the choices that define a life. Violence or peace, taking or giving, fear or trust. He thought about Ruth's words, written in her last letter, "You're meant for something gentle, my love." She'd known. Somehow, even at the end, she'd known this moment would come, that he'd be tested, that he'd have to choose again between the man the war had tried to make him and the man she'd helped him become. "I chose right," he whispered to her memory. "Didn't I, Ruth? I chose right." The animals slept peacefully outside his door, and somewhere in the darkness a wolf kept watch. Harlan slept too finally and dreamed of gentle hands and a voice saying, "You chose perfect, my kind man. You chose perfect." By the third week, the animals numbered in the hundreds. Harlan's 3 acres could barely contain them, and they'd spread into the surrounding vacant land, forming a massive gathering that drew gasps from everyone who saw it. Birds covered the fence lines and roof. Deer and elk grazed in improbable proximity to predators. The harmony held, impossible and undeniable. Harlan was exhausted. The donations helped with feeding the animals, but the sheer work of it, hauling feed, distributing water, maintaining some semblance of order, wore him down. He'd lost more weight. His hands shook sometimes. Sleep came hard and shallow, Tommy noticed. "Mr. Tate, you need to eat more. Mama says you're getting too thin." "I'm fine, son," Harlan said, though they both knew it was a lie. Elena started bringing meals every other day, refusing to take no for an answer. "You can't take care of them if you don't take care of yourself," she said firmly, and Harlan accepted because her determination reminded him so much of Ruth. Sarah Chen returned to do a follow-up story. During her interview, she mentioned that she'd spoken with Thomas Blackhorse, a Navajo elder from the reservation north of Albuquerque. "He told me stories," Sarah said, "about this land, about animal guardians and sacred grounds. Would you be willing to meet with him?" Harlan wasn't sure what good it would do, but he agreed. The next day, Thomas Blackhorse arrived in a battered pickup older than Harlan's shack. He was perhaps 80, with deep lines in his face and eyes that held the kind of wisdom that came from truly listening to the world. They sat on the porch, watching the animals. Blackhorse didn't speak for a long time, just observed with a stillness that was comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, he said, "My grandfather told me stories about this land. Before the town, before the settlers, this was a gathering place. For people?" Harlan asked. "For all living things. The old ones believed some places held power, not human power, but the power of the earth itself. Places where the boundaries between what we call natural and supernatural grew thin." He gestured toward the animals. "When the treaties came, when we were moved to the reservation, my grandfather said the land would remember, that when the time was right, it would wake again. I just fed a wolf," Harlan said. "I don't have any power," Blackhorse smiled gently. "That's exactly why you were chosen. Power seeks power. But kindness, true kindness, that's rarer. The old prophecies spoke of the kind one who shares his last. When that happened, the old ways would wake." Harlan felt a chill despite the warm sun. "What old ways?" "The truth that everything is connected, that giving creates more than taking, that the land belongs to all creatures, not just humans." Blackhorse looked at him directly. "You didn't summon these animals, Mr. Tate. You reminded them of something they already knew. You reminded all of us." After Blackhorse left, Harlan sat with those words, trying to make sense of them. He'd never been a particularly spiritual man. He'd believed in God in the general way most people did, but he'd never felt chosen or special, just ordinary, just a man trying to live decent. That evening, searching through an old box for photographs to show Tommy the next day, Harlan found Ruth's Bible. She'd kept it by her bedside their entire marriage, reading passages when she couldn't sleep. He opened it, and a piece of paper fell out, a letter in Ruth's handwriting. Dated 1 month before she died, his hands trembled as he read, "My dearest Harlan, I had a dream last night, so vivid I can still feel it hours later. I saw you surrounded by animals, hundreds of them, all peaceful and calm. You were sitting on our porch, not young but not as old as you are now, and you were smiling. Really smiling, the way you used to when we first met. I know you'll think this is the morphine talking, or my mind going, but I need you to know what I saw, because it felt true in a way dreams usually don't. You were happy, my love. After years of being alone, and I know you will be alone for a while after I'm gone, though I wish it weren't so, you had found purpose again. The animals trusted you. People came from far away to see what you'd done, but the most important part was this: you looked at peace. You looked like a man who'd found his way back to who he was always meant to be. You're meant for something gentle, my love, something kind. The war tried to make you hard, but you chose softness with me, with the animals we tended, with the life we built. Don't forget that after I'm gone. Don't let grief make you hard. There's a kindness in you deeper than you know. One day, maybe sooner than you think, you'll be asked to give when you have nothing left to give. When that moment comes, trust your heart. Give anyway. The rest will follow. I love you more than words. I love you beyond this life. And I know, with absolute certainty, that we'll see each other again when your time comes. Until then, be the good man I married. Be the gentle soul I've loved for 40 years. Always yours, Ruth. Harlan read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face and dripping onto the paper. She'd known. She'd seen this moment coming, had tried to prepare him for it, even as cancer ate away her strength. Ruth, he whispered. Oh, Ruth. He sat there for a long time, holding the letter, feeling the weight of prophecy and love and loss, all tangled together. The ring against his chest felt warm, as if it carried some echo of the woman who'd worn it. The next morning, Martin Reeves returned, and this time he brought lawyers. 3 men in expensive suits, carrying briefcases and surveying equipment. They spread documents across Harlan's porch without asking permission. Mr. Tate, Reeves said, his earlier politeness replaced with cool efficiency. We've done extensive research on your property boundaries. There are some questions about the original deed. Potential irregularities that might affect your ownership claim. I've owned this land 30 years, Harlan said, voice steady despite the fear rising in his chest. Bought and paid for. Ownership can be complicated, one of the lawyers said, especially when original surveys were incomplete or inaccurate. We're prepared to challenge your claim in court if necessary. It was a threat, barely veiled. They couldn't force him to sell, so they'd try to take it another way. The animals reacted to the tension. The wolf, Harlan's wolf, he'd come to think of it, appeared at the edge of the property, moved forward slowly until it stood between Harlan and the developers. Not aggressive, but unmistakably protective. Reeves took a step back, his composure cracking. That thing should be shot. It's dangerous. He's protecting what's his to protect, Harlan said. Same as any creature would. The lawyers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. Reeves tried to regain control. This isn't over, Mr. Tate. We have resources you can't imagine. This land will be developed, one way or another. After they left, Harlan felt the weight of exhaustion settle over him like a physical thing. His chest ached. His breath came short. He sat heavily in his chair and put his head in his hands. Elena found him like that an hour later. Mr. Tate, Harlan, are you okay? Just tired, he managed. Just very tired. She called Doc Henderson, who came and examined Harlan right there on the porch. Blood pressure too high. Heart rate irregular. Signs of malnutrition and exhaustion that couldn't be ignored. You need to go to the hospital, Doc said firmly. This is serious, Harlan. Can't leave them, Harlan said, gesturing to the animals. They need me. They need you alive, Elena said, her voice breaking. Please, I'll rest, Harlan promised. I'll eat. I'll take it easier. But I'm not leaving. Not until this is done. Doc wanted to argue, but one look at Harlan's face told him it would be useless. Stubborn old fool, he muttered. But he left instructions for Elena and promised to check back daily. That night, Harlan sat with Ruth's letter in his lap, reading it again by lamplight. Outside, the animals kept their vigil. The wolf had stayed close to the house since the developers left, a silent guardian. I'm trying, Harlan said to Ruth's words. I'm doing what you said, being kind even when I've got nothing left. But I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The ring warmed against his chest, and for just a moment, Harlan could have sworn he felt Ruth's hand on his shoulder, her voice in his ear saying, just a little longer, my love. Just hold on a little longer. He closed his eyes and let himself believe it, let himself feel her presence. And in the morning, somehow, he found the strength to rise again. The town meeting was called for 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening, held in the basement of the First Methodist Church because it was the only space large enough to hold everyone who wanted to attend. The topic, according to the notice posted at the general store, the animal situation and future of Mercy Springs. Harlan didn't want to go. Public speaking had never been his strength, and the thought of standing in front of the whole town made his already fragile heart race. But Sheriff Brunson had asked him personally, and Elena had said quietly, they need to hear from you. Not the reporters or the scientists, you! So he went, Tommy walking beside him like a young guard, Eleanor on his other side. The animals had seemed restless when he left, the wolf pacing at the property line as if it knew something important was happening. The church basement was packed. Every folding chair filled, people standing along the walls, tension thick enough to taste. Mayor Hendricks stood at the front beside a projection screen, looking both nervous and excited. Martin Reeves sat in the front row with his lawyers, perfectly composed and clearly confident. Harlan found a seat near the back, trying to be inconspicuous. But heads turned. People whispered. Some smiled and nodded, others looked away. The town was divided, and everyone knew it. Mayor Hendricks called the meeting to order, speaking too loud into a microphone that squealed feedback. Thank you all for coming. We're here to discuss the situation with Mr. Tate's property and the, unusual animal gathering. Mr. Reeves has asked for time to present a proposal that could benefit the entire community. Martin? Reeves stood smoothly, pressing a button that brought up an image on the projection screen. A detailed survey map showing not just Harlan's 3 acres, but 40 acres of surrounding land, all marked in bright colors indicating different zones of development. Ladies and gentlemen, Reeves began, his voice carrying easily without a microphone. I understand there's been resistance to our development proposal. I want to address that by showing you the full scope of what we're offering Mercy Springs. He clicked through slides showing architectural renderings. A modern visitor center with glass walls and natural wood. A research facility. A boutique hotel with 40 rooms. Gift shops and restaurants. Parking areas and walking trails. The Mercy Springs Resort and Convention Center, Reeves said. A destination that would bring hundreds of jobs to this community. Construction jobs first, then permanent positions in hospitality, maintenance, management. We're estimating an economic impact of $12 million annually. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. $12 million. For a town dying by inches, it was an almost unimaginable sum. Reeves continued, smooth and practiced. Now I know some of you are concerned about the animals. I want to be clear, we're not proposing to harm them. We'd preserve 2 acres at the center of the development as a wildlife sanctuary. The animals would be protected, observed respectfully by researchers and visitors. Everyone wins, except the animals, a voice called out. It was Frank Morrison, the old rancher who'd been skeptical from the start, but now he sounded more thoughtful than critical. 2 acres out of 40? What about the rest? That's their land too. With respect, Mr. Morrison, Reeves said, land belongs to whoever holds the deed. These are wild animals. They don't own anything. Neither did the Native Americans, according to folks who thought like you, Morrison shot back. Didn't make it right then. Don't make it right now. The tension ratcheted higher. Mayor Hendricks tried to regain control. Now let's keep this civil. Frank, you'll have your turn to speak. Martin, please continue. Reeves pulled up another slide. The survey map again, but this time with property lines clearly marked. Here's where it gets interesting. Our research has uncovered some irregularities with the original land survey from 1948. Mr. Tate's property boundaries may not be where he thinks they are. In fact, there's a strong possibility that a portion of his land, including the area where the animals primarily gather, may actually be part of the adjacent parcel, which happens to be county land. Harlan felt ice in his stomach. They were going to try to take it through legal manipulation, claim the land wasn't even his. We filed a formal challenge with the county assessor, Reeves continued. Pending resolution, which could take months or years, development cannot proceed. But we're offering Mr. Tate and the community a better solution. We settle the boundary question in mediation. Mr. Tate accepts fair compensation for whatever portion is properly his, and we move forward with development that benefits everyone. Everyone except Harlan, Elena Martinez said, standing. Her voice shook but carried. Everyone except the man who showed this town what kindness looks like. You want to take his land through legal tricks and call it fair? Mrs. Martinez, Reeves said with exaggerated patience, no one is taking anything. We're simply ensuring proper ownership is established. If Mr. Tate has clear title, he keeps his land. If he doesn't, well, that's not our fault. But it's convenient for you, Sheriff Brunson said from near the door. Real convenient, how these boundary questions suddenly appeared right after Mr. Tate refused your offers. The crowd was growing restless. Some people nodded in agreement with Elena and the sheriff. Others looked calculating, clearly doing math about jobs and economic impact versus one old man's stubborn refusal to sell. Can we hear from Harlan? Someone called. He hasn't said a word. All eyes turned to the back where Harlan sat. He wanted to disappear, wanted to be anywhere but here. But Tommy was looking at him with those hopeful eyes, and Eleanor had trusted him to speak, and Ruth's letter was folded in his pocket against his heart. He stood slowly, every eye in the room fixed on him, made his way to the front, feeling older and more tired than he ever had. Mayor Hendricks offered him the microphone, but Harlan waved it away. His voice had carried across battlefields and open range. It would carry here. I understand hard times, he said, and the room went silent. Lost everything myself after Ruth died. Medical bills took it all. I know what it means to be desperate, to need money, to look at opportunities and feel like you can't say no. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But what's happening on my land, it ain't mine to sell. These animals came because... He stopped, struggling with how to explain what he barely understood himself. They came because kindness still matters. Because in a world that's mostly about taking and using and profiting, there's still room for giving, for sharing, for being gentle with creatures that can't defend themselves against us. That's beautiful, Harlan, Mayor Hendricks said uncomfortably. But we've got to think practical. I am thinking practical, Harlan said firmly. You want to build on that land? On the one good thing left? On something that reminds people of who we used to be before we got so focused on money and development that we forgot what really matters. He looked around the room, meeting eyes. This town is dying. I know that, but dying with your values intact is better than surviving by selling them. You build that resort, and maybe jobs come for a while. But what happens when the animals leave? When the magic is gone? You'll have a half-empty hotel and the knowledge that you traded wonder for profit. Tommy stood then, his young voice clear in the hushed room. My dad left because he said this town had nothing. But we have something now. Something nobody else has. Something real. If we destroy it for money, we really will have nothing. Nothing that matters. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She put her hand on her son's shoulder. The room erupted in discussion. People arguing, agreeing, disagreeing. Voices rising. Mayor Hendricks banging his gavel and calling for order. Through it all, Harlan stood at the front, feeling the weight of every eye, every expectation. He thought about Ruth's letter, about being meant for something gentle, about giving when you had nothing left. The meeting ended without resolution. The council was split 3-3 on whether to support Reeves's development plan. They'd have to vote again after reviewing the boundary claim. It could take weeks. Outside, in the parking lot under stars that looked close enough to touch, people gathered in small groups. Some approached Harlan to shake his hand or offer support. Others avoided eye contact, clearly siding with development and economic opportunity. Tommy stayed close to Harlan's side. "You did good, Mr. Tate. You told the truth." "Truth doesn't always win, son," Harlan said tiredly. "But it's still worth telling," Elena said. "Always." As Harlan drove his borrowed truck back toward home, he saw them from a distance, the animals, hundreds of them, silhouetted against the night sky. And among them, closer to the house, the wolf waiting. The animals knew something was coming. Harlan could feel it in the air, in the way the night felt charged with anticipation. The battle for the land was just beginning, and he was already exhausted. But as he pulled up to the shack and the animals made space for him to pass, he thought about Tommy's fierce defense, Eleanor's support, the people who'd stood with him despite the pressure. He wasn't alone in this fight. Not anymore. That night, the animals called out together, howls and cries and songs that carried across the desert. The entire town heard it. Some wept at the beauty. Others felt fear, but everyone understood something was shifting. Something was coming to a head. Harlan sat on his porch, hand over his heart where Ruth's ring rested, and listened to the chorus. "I'm ready," he said to the night, to Ruth's memory, to whatever came next. "Whatever happens, I'm ready." The morning after the animal chorus, Harlan woke to the sound of engines. Heavy engines. The kind that meant machinery, construction equipment, trouble. He dressed quickly despite the trembling in his hands and the ache in his chest. Stepped out onto the porch to see Martin Reeves standing at the property line with a security team. 4 men in matching polo shirts with radios on their belts. Behind them, a bulldozer sat on a flatbed trailer, gleaming yellow in the early sun. Sheriff Brunson was already there, his patrol car parked sideways across the access road. He stood with his arms crossed, face set in hard lines. "Martin," Brunson called out, "you can't bring that equipment onto disputed land, not without a court order." "We have authorization from the county for a preliminary site assessment," Reeves said, holding up a document. "The boundary question needs resolution. We're entitled to survey the contested area. That's convenient wording for we're going to intimidate an old man." Brunson shot back. People were gathering already. Word spread fast in small towns. Mrs. Chen pulled up in her ancient sedan. Elena arrived with Tommy, both of them looking frightened but determined. Within 20 minutes, maybe 50 townspeople lined the road, some clearly supporting Harlan, others hanging back uncertainly. Harlan walked slowly to where Brunson stood. His legs felt unsteady, but he kept his back straight. "Sheriff, it's all right. Let him do his survey. Harlan, let him. I got nothing to hide. Land's mine, clear and legal. Let him waste his time and money." Reeves smiled thinly. "How reasonable of you, Mr. Tate. We'll try to minimize disruption to your—" He gestured at the animals, "guests." The security team moved forward, carrying surveying equipment. The animals reacted immediately. They didn't flee, but they gathered closer together, tension rippling through the herd. The mountain lion stood. The bear shifted its weight. The coyotes formed a loose line. Harlan felt his heart hammering. He'd seen this once before, the night the drunk hunters came. The animals moving with unified purpose, protective and powerful. He didn't want violence. Didn't want anyone hurt, but he didn't know how to stop what was building. Then, movement at the edge of the property. The wolf. It appeared from the east, walking steadily through the gathered crowd of people and animals alike. But something was different this time. The wolf carried something in its mouth, something that caught the morning light, something heavy by the way the wolf's head dipped. The crowd went silent. Even Reeves and his security team stopped to watch, as the wolf approached Harlan directly, weaving through rabbits and deer with measured steps. It came right up to the porch, close enough for Harlan to see the intelligence in those yellow eyes, the deliberation in every movement. The wolf lowered its head and dropped its burden at Harlan's feet. It was a stone disc, roughly the size of a dinner plate, but irregular around the edges. Even covered in dirt, Harlan could see markings carved into its surface. Symbols, shapes, patterns worn by time but still visible. Petroglyphs. The wolf stepped back, sat, and watched Harlan with what could only be described as expectation. Harlan knelt slowly, his knee protesting, and picked up the stone. It was heavy sandstone, maybe, warm from being carried. He brushed dirt away from the surface, revealing more of the carved images. Animals in profile, deer, bear, birds. Human figures with arms raised, stars or celestial markers. A spiral that drew the eye inward. What is that? Someone in the crowd asked. Before Harlan could answer, Thomas Blackhorse pushed through the gathered people. The elder had been standing at the back watching quietly. Now he came forward quickly, his weathered face transformed by shock and something like awe. He reached the porch and looked at the stone in Harlan's hands. Then, to everyone's surprise, the old man dropped to his knees. "The council stone," Blackhorse breathed. "Grandfather's grandfather spoke of it. Lost for more than 150 years. What is it?" Harlan asked, his voice rough. Blackhorse looked up, eyes shining. "A marker. When the tribes met in peace, Navajo, Apache, Pueblo peoples, they gathered on neutral ground under animal protection. This stone marked those places. Sacred gathering grounds, where no blood could be shed, where all creatures were safe." His hand hovered over the stone without touching it. "This proves it. This land was never meant for ownership or development. It's a sacred site." "That's convenient," Reeves said loudly, contempt clear in his voice. "A magic stone appears right when you need it." "Superstitious nonsense." Blackhorse stood slowly with dignity. "You may call it what you wish. But there are federal laws protecting indigenous sacred sites. If this stone is authentic, and I believe it is, your development plans are finished." "If it's authentic," Reeves repeated. "Easy enough to plant artifacts, especially when motivated by—" "I'll call the state archaeologist," Sheriff Brunson interrupted. "Right now. We'll get expert authentication." He pulled out his phone, already dialing. The crowd erupted in discussion. Some people were excited, seeing this as salvation for Harlan and the animals. Others were angry, believing it was too convenient to be real. Arguments broke out. Voices rose. Through it all, Harlan stood holding the stone, looking at the wolf. The animal met his gaze steadily, then turned and began walking back toward the hills. It paused once, looked back as if to make sure Harlan understood, then disappeared into the scrubland. "Thank you," Harlan whispered. "Dr. Patricia Reeves," no relation to Martin, arrived within 2 hours, driving down from Albuquerque with a graduate student and a case full of testing equipment. She was the state's leading archaeological authority on indigenous artifacts, and her assessment would carry legal weight. She examined the stone on Harlan's porch table, turning it carefully, photographing it from every angle, taking small samples from the edges for analysis. The crowd had grown larger, everyone waiting for her verdict. After an hour of examination, Dr. Reeves looked up. "Preliminary assessment authentic. The carving techniques, weathering patterns, and stone composition are consistent with pre-colonial southwestern artifacts, likely pre-1700s. I'll need to do detailed analysis in my lab, but I'd stake my professional reputation on this being genuine." A cheer went up from Harlan's supporters. Martin Reeves's face went dark with fury. "This isn't over," the developer said. "One stone doesn't prove this entire area is a sacred site. Doesn't prove anything except someone found an old rock." "Actually," Dr. Reeves said, looking at him with cool, professional disdain, "council stones were specifically placed to mark boundaries of sacred gathering grounds. If this is authentic, and I believe it is, then federal law requires a full archaeological survey of the surrounding area before any development can proceed. That process typically takes 3 to 5 years." "Years?" Martin Reeves's professional mask cracked completely. "This is absurd. You're all being played by a con artist and a trained wolf." "Mr. Reeves," Sheriff Brunson said quietly, "I think it's time for you and your team to leave." For a moment, it looked like Reeves might refuse. Then he seemed to realize how badly he'd lost this round. He gestured sharply to his security team and stalked back to his vehicle. Before leaving, he turned and pointed at Harlan. "This isn't finished. I have resources you can't imagine. Lawyers, investigators, connections. We'll find a way." After he left, tires spitting gravel, the atmosphere shifted. People crowded closer, wanting to see the stone, to touch it, to be part of the moment. Dr. Reeves carefully wrapped the artifact in protective cloth. "I'll need to take this for proper analysis," she said to Harlan. "You'll get it back, I promise. But we need to document everything properly for the legal proceedings. There's likely more," Thomas Blackhorse said. "Council stones were never placed alone. There would have been other artifacts, pottery, tools, possibly burial sites. The gathering grounds were used for generations." "Then we'll find them," Dr. Reeves said, with the excitement of someone glimpsing a major discovery. "I'll have a team here within the week to begin a proper survey." Harlan sat heavily in his porch chair, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. The stone was going to protect the land. He understood that much. But the magnitude of what had just happened overwhelmed him. The wolf had brought proof, deliberate, purposeful proof that the land was sacred, that the animals' gathering wasn't random, that everything Blackhorse had said about old ways and ancient purposes was true. Tommy sat on the porch step near Harlan's feet. "The wolf knew," the boy said with wonder. "It knew exactly what you needed." "Seems like it," Harlan managed. "Elena brought him water, made him drink it." "You're pale. Should we call Doc Henderson?" "I'm all right. Just a lot to take in." But he wasn't all right. His chest ached. His hands trembled. The relief and vindication were real, but so was the bone-deep exhaustion of a man who'd been fighting battles he never asked for. That evening, after the crowds dispersed and the excitement faded to quiet conversation, Harlan sat alone with the animals. They seemed calmer now, as if they too understood that something had been settled. The immediate threat had passed. Sheriff Brunson stopped by with coffee and sat on the porch steps. "You know what the strange part is?" he said. "I'm starting to believe this was meant to happen, all of it. The wolf, the animals, the stone, like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. I fed a hungry animal," Harlan said. "That's all I did. You chose kindness when you had nothing left to give. Maybe that's all it ever takes to change the world. One person making the right choice at the right moment." After Brunson left, Harlan pulled out Ruth's letter and read it again by lamplight. "You reminded them of something they already knew," she'd written. "You reminded all of us." He understood now. He wasn't the owner of this land. Never had been. He was the guardian, the one who'd been present when the land decided to wake itself, to remember what it had been before fences and deeds and human claims of ownership. The wolf had brought the stone because Harlan had shared his cornbread, had reminded the land and the animals, and maybe even the universe, that kindness still existed, still mattered, still had power to change things. "I'm not chosen," Harlan said to the night, to Ruth's memory. "I'm just the one who was here. The one who did what you taught me to do." He touched the ring through his shirt and felt warmth there, as if Ruth was close, as if she'd been guiding all of this from wherever she'd gone when she left him. The animals slept peacefully around him. The land held its breath. And somewhere in the hills, a wolf howled once. Not a cry of hunger or warning, but something else entirely. Something that sounded like satisfaction, like a task completed, like a promise fulfilled. Harlan closed his eyes and let himself rest, really rest for the first time in weeks. The land was safe. The animals were safe. He'd done what he was meant to do. Everything else would unfold as it was meant to. He just had to keep being who Ruth had always known he was. A good man, a kind man, a gentle soul in a world that needed gentleness more than it knew. The archaeological team arrived 6 days after the stone's discovery. Dr. Patricia Reeves brought 5 graduate students, ground-penetrating radar equipment, and enough enthusiasm to power a small city. They set up a base camp on the adjacent county land and began the methodical work of surveying every inch of the 40-acre area surrounding Harlan's property. Within 3 days, they'd found more artifacts. Pottery shards buried 18 inches down. Stone tools scattered across a section of land that had once been a seasonal camp. What looked like the remains of a fire pit, carbon dating pending, but estimated at 300 years old or more. Federal agents arrived to secure the area. The Bureau of Indian Affairs sent representatives. Tribal councils from 3 nations filed protective claims. The land was officially designated a site of potential archaeological significance, which meant all development was frozen pending completion of the survey, a process that could take years, Martin. Reeves didn't take defeat gracefully. He hired a different kind of lawyer this time, not the professional, soft-spoken type, but attack dogs. They filed motions challenging the sacred site designation. They argued that indigenous artifacts didn't automatically convey eternal protection. They suggested, in carefully worded legal language, that the whole thing might be an elaborate fraud. Then Reeves went after Harlan directly. A story appeared in a regional business magazine, anonymously sourced, but clearly coming from Reeves's camp. It painted Harlan as a con artist who trained a wolf, planted artifacts, and manipulated a dying town for personal gain. It pointed out the donations he'd received, implying he'd orchestrated everything for profit. "Look at the timeline," the article said. "A poor man with nothing suddenly becomes the center of national attention. Money pours in. Then conveniently, evidence appears to block development that would have displaced him. Suspicious doesn't begin to cover it. The story got picked up by larger outlets, always with the caveat of allegations and questions raised, but the damage was done. Social media erupted with arguments. People who'd never heard of Mercy Springs before suddenly had strong opinions about whether Harlan was a saint or a scammer. Some townspeople who'd supported Harlan began to waver. The money Reeves had promised would have changed lives. Now it looked like it might never come, and someone had to be blamed. "Awful convenient that stone appeared," Frank Morrison said at the general store, loud enough for others to hear. "Right when Harlan needed it most." Others defended him fiercely. "You think he trained wild animals to sit peaceful with predators?" Mary from the diner shot back. "You think that old man has the strength or know-how to fake petroglyphs that fool the state archaeologist? Use your head, Frank." But doubt, once planted, grew like weeds. Harlan knew about the article. Tommy had shown him on Elena's phone, worried and angry. Harlan had read it once and set the phone down. "Lies," Tommy said. "All lies. Some people need someone to blame," Harlan said quietly. "Can't blame them for being scared of losing what Reeves promised. But you could defend yourself. Tell everyone the truth. I have told the truth. Those who want to believe it will. Those who don't won't change their minds because of anything I say. What hurt wasn't the accusations." Harlan had lived long enough to know that truth and lies often got tangled in the minds of people who wanted to believe a certain thing. What hurt was the division it caused. Families arguing, friends choosing sides, the town splitting further apart when it needed unity most. Tommy and Elena continued their research, spending hours in the town library and county records office. Elena had taken time off work, time she couldn't afford, to help Harlan navigate the legal complexities. She'd found something important: the original town charter from 1887. It was kept in a climate-controlled box in the courthouse basement, handwritten in careful script on yellowing paper. And buried in the legal language was a preservation clause. Lands known to indigenous peoples as sacred gathering. Grounds shall be maintained in perpetuity, for communal use and protection of natural order. The clause had been added at the insistence of a circuit judge who'd been married to a Navajo woman. It had never been enforced, probably never even noticed by subsequent town councils. But it was there, in the founding document of Mercy Springs. Elena showed it to a pro bono lawyer from Santa Fe who'd taken interest in the case. The lawyer, a sharp woman named Jennifer Ortiz, actually smiled when she read it. "Combined with the sacred site designation, this is powerful," she said. "The town itself committed to protecting these lands. That commitment doesn't expire just because people forget about it." But Martin Reeves had found something too. His lawyers produced a document from 1952, an amendment to the charter that supposedly released land restrictions for purposes of economic development and railroad expansion. It was dated to the exact time when the town had been negotiating with the railroad company. Though those negotiations had ultimately failed, the amendment's authenticity was questionable. The signatures looked rushed. The document had been filed but never properly recorded in the town minutes. But it existed, and Reeves's lawyers argued it superseded the original preservation clause. The legal battle became complex, technical, fought with motions and counter-motions. Both sides presented their cases. A hearing was scheduled in federal court in Santa Fe, 1 week away. The judge would decide whether the land received permanent protection or whether development could eventually proceed. Through it all, Harlan's health continued to decline. Doc Henderson visited 3 times a week now, monitoring blood pressure that wouldn't stabilize and a heart that beat irregularly. Harlan had lost 20 pounds he couldn't afford to lose. His face was gaunt, his hands shook constantly, and some mornings he couldn't get out of bed without help. "You're dying, Harlan," Doc said bluntly one morning. "Slowly but surely. Stress is killing you. You need to rest, really rest. Preferably in a hospital." "Can't," Harlan said. "Not till this is finished. It might finish you first. Then that's how it goes." Elena was there for that conversation. After Doc left, she sat on the porch steps and cried quietly. Tommy, who'd heard everything, pressed close to Harlan's side. "You can't die, Mr. Tate," the boy said fiercely. "You can't. We all die eventually, son. That's just how it works, but not yet. Not before you see this through." Harlan touched the boy's head gently. "I'll do my best. That's all any of us can do." 2 days before the court hearing, Thomas Blackhorse returned with members of the tribal council. They asked permission to perform a blessing ceremony on the land, a traditional gathering to honor the sacred site and ask for protection. "We'd like the whole town to attend," Blackhorse said. "Not just our people, everyone. Let them see what this land means. Let them feel it," Harlan agreed. Word spread. The ceremony was set for sunset the evening before the court date. When the time came, nearly 200 people gathered on and around Harlan's property. Tribal members in traditional dress, townspeople in their everyday clothes, reporters keeping respectful distance. Even some who'd questioned Harlan came, curious or moved by something they couldn't name. The animals remained calm throughout, as if they understood this was important. They formed a loose circle around the gathered humans, present but unobtrusive. The ceremony was beautiful. Drumming and singing. Prayers in languages Harlan didn't understand, but felt in his bones. Blackhorse blessed the 4 directions, the earth, the sky. He spoke of balance and harmony, of the old ways when humans and animals shared the world rather than fighting over it. Harlan was invited to participate. He stood shakily, supported by Elena and Tommy, and listened as Blackhorse blessed him specifically. "Guardian who remembered. Kind one who shared when you had nothing. The land thanks you. The animals thank you. The old ones thank you." Tears streamed down Harlan's face. He touched Ruth's ring through his shirt, felt her presence so strongly it was almost physical. During a quiet moment in the ceremony, Harlan had a vision. Or maybe not a vision, maybe just exhaustion and emotion, creating something that felt real. But he saw Ruth, young and healthy, standing among the animals. She smiled at him, that bright smile he'd fallen in love with 50 years ago. "You found your purpose, my love," she said, or seemed to say. "Keep being who you are." Just a little longer, the vision faded. Harlan swayed and Elena caught him. "I'm okay," he whispered. "I'm okay." The ceremony continued. The sun set in brilliant colors, gold and orange and purple spreading across the western sky. The drums beat like heartbeats. The songs rose and fell. And for a moment, everyone gathered there felt it. The connection, the sacredness, the sense that they stood on ground that held memory and power older than any of them. When it ended, people didn't want to leave. They lingered, talking quietly, some crying, some smiling. The division that had split the town seemed smaller somehow, less important in the face of what they'd just experienced. Mayor Hendricks approached Harlan, looking uncomfortable, but sincere. I think I've been looking at this all wrong. Money's important, sure, but maybe some things matter more." Harlan shook his hand, too tired to speak. That night, after everyone had gone home, Harlan sat on his porch with Elena and Tommy. The animals had settled for sleep. The stars burned bright overhead. "Tomorrow," Harlan said quietly. "Tomorrow we'll know. Tomorrow you're going to that courthouse and winning," Tommy said fiercely. "Because you're right and they're wrong. Doesn't always work that way, son." "It should." "Yes," Harlan agreed softly. "It should." Elena drove them home reluctantly, making Harlan promise to call if he needed anything. He promised, though they both knew he probably wouldn't. Alone, finally, Harlan tried to prepare for the next day, tried to steel himself for court, for lawyers, for a judge deciding the fate of land that had already decided its own fate. But his chest hurt. His breathing came short. The exhaustion was overwhelming. He made it as far as the bedroom before the pain hit, sharp and radiating, like a fist squeezing his heart. He gasped, stumbled, caught himself on the doorframe. Outside, the animals reacted instantly. The wolf howled. Others joined, a chorus of distress and alarm. Harlan sank to his knees, one hand pressed to his chest. This was it, he thought. This was how it ended. One day before the hearing, one day before knowing whether everything had been worth it. "Not yet," he gasped. "Please, not yet." The ring against his chest felt warm, almost hot. In his dimming vision, he thought he saw Ruth again, kneeling beside him, her hand on his face. "Not yet, my love," she seemed to say. "Just hold on. Just a little longer." The pain crested, overwhelming. Harlan's vision went dark around the edges. Outside, the animals' cries intensified. The wolf's howl rose above all others, urgent and desperate, and then voices, human voices. Someone pounding on the door. "Harlan! Harlan, open up!" "Sheriff Brunson." He'd heard the animals, understood something was wrong. The door burst open. Brunson and Doc Henderson, who'd been having coffee at the diner when the animal chorus started, rushed in. "Call an ambulance!" Doc ordered, already kneeling beside Harlan, checking his pulse. "No hospital," Harlan managed. "Have to court tomorrow." "You're having a heart attack, you stubborn fool," Doc said. "You're going to the hospital right now." Harlan tried to protest, but darkness pulled at him. The last thing he heard before consciousness faded was the wolf howling, long and mournful, and Doc saying, "Don't you dare die on me. Harlan Tate, don't you dare." Harlan woke in a hospital bed with monitors beeping and an IV in his arm. Elena sat in a chair beside him, her head bowed in what might have been sleep or prayer. Through the window, early morning light suggested dawn, which meant, "What time is it?" His voice came out as a croak. Eleanor's head snapped up. "Harlan, thank God, it's 6:30. The hearing's at 9. "Have to go," he said, trying to sit up. Pain lanced through his chest and he gasped. "You're not going anywhere," Doc Henderson said, appearing in the doorway. "You had a heart attack, Harlan. A significant one. You need to stay here under observation, probably for several days." "Can't. Have to be there. You could die if you leave this hospital." "I'll die anyway. Rather do it in court than lying here." Doc and Elena exchanged glances. Finally, Doc sighed. "You're the most stubborn man I've ever met. If you insist on going, I'm coming with you. And you're staying in a wheelchair. Those are my terms." So at 8:30, Harlan found himself being wheeled into the federal courthouse in Santa Fe, Elena pushing the chair, Doc walking alongside with a medical bag. Tommy met them at the entrance, having convinced his mother to let him miss school for this. The courtroom was packed. Tribal representatives filled one side. Townspeople from Mercy Springs occupied most of the gallery. Reporters lined the back wall. And at the plaintiff's table, Martin Reeves sat with his team of lawyers, looking confident and expensive. Judge Rebecca Thornton entered promptly at 9, a woman in her 60s with grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. Everyone stood except Harlan, who couldn't. The proceedings began with opening statements. Reeves's lead attorney argued that while the archaeological findings were interesting, they didn't justify permanent prohibition of development. That the 1952 amendment to the town charter clearly released land restrictions. That economic opportunity for a dying community should weigh heavily in the court's considerations. Jennifer Ortiz, representing Harlan and the tribal interests, countered that federal law protecting sacred sites superseded local economic concerns. That the 1952 amendment was legally questionable and possibly fraudulent. That the original charter's preservation clause reflected the town's foundational values and should be honored. Then came the testimony. Dr. Patricia Reeves explained the significance of the archaeological findings. Thomas Blackhorse spoke about the historical and cultural importance of gathering grounds. Martin Reeves took the stand and presented himself as a reasonable businessman trying to help a struggling community. Judge Thornton listened to everything with careful attention, taking notes, asking sharp questions that suggested she'd done her own research. Finally, Harlan was called to testify. Elena wheeled him to the stand. The bailiff had to help him into the witness chair. He looked, Harlan knew, like a dying man. Pale, gaunt, shaking, but he kept his back as straight as he could manage. Ortiz questioned him gently, asked him to describe what had happened. From the night he fed the wolf through the arrival of the animals to the discovery of the stone. I didn't do it for recognition, Harlan said, his voice thin but steady. I did it because I was hungry and the wolf was hungry and it seemed right to share. That's all. Everything else, the animals coming, the stone appearing, that wasn't me. That was something bigger, something I don't fully understand, but respect. Reeves's lawyer cross-examined more aggressively, pointed out the donations Harlan had received, suggested the timing of the stone's discovery was awfully convenient, implied that a desperate old man might do desperate things. Mr. Tate, the lawyer said, isn't it true that you were facing eviction from your property? That you had no money and no prospects? That suddenly becoming the center of national attention solved a lot of your problems? Harlan looked at him steadily. Sir, I'm 67 years old. Dying, probably. Got no money, no family left. What would I gain from a con? Attention, fame, the donations that poured in, which you claimed went to feed the animals, but could easily have every cent, Harlan said, voice hardening. Every single cent bought feed. I got receipts. Mrs. Chen at the general store can verify. I don't want fame. I just wanted to do one kind thing before I died. One good thing in a life that's been mostly ordinary. If that makes me a con artist in your eyes, I can't change that. But I know the truth. The animals know it. And that land knows it. Silence filled the courtroom. Mr. Tate, Judge Thornton said, speaking directly to him for the first time, let me ask you something. If this court rules in favor of development, what will you do? Harlan considered the question. I'll leave. Won't fight it anymore. I've done what I could. If that's not enough, then I'll accept it and go. And if the court rules in your favor, I'll stay as long as I'm able. Guard that land till someone better comes along to take over, because it needs guarding. Not from animals or nature, but from people who see only what they can take from it instead of what it can teach us. Judge Thornton studied him for a long moment. Thank you, Mr. Tate. You may step down. Eleanor wheeled him back to their table. Harlan felt hollowed out, exhausted beyond measure. His chest ached constantly now, a dull throb that promised worse to come. The judge heard closing arguments, then announced she would recess for lunch before delivering her ruling. This is an unusual case requiring careful consideration. I'll have my decision by 2 o'clock. The courtroom emptied slowly. People clustered in the hallway, talking in hushed voices. Harlan asked Elena to wheel him outside, needing air and space, on the courthouse steps, with Tommy standing close and Doc checking his vitals yet again. Harlan looked up at the bright New Mexico sky and touched Ruth's ring through his shirt. I did my best, he whispered. That's all I had. Then the pain hit again, sharper this time, more insistent. His vision blurred. He heard voices calling his name, felt hands catching him as he slumped in the wheelchair. Call an ambulance. Someone shouted, Not yet, Harlan tried to say. Need to hear, need to know. But darkness was pulling him down, and this time it felt final. This time it felt like the end. The last thing he saw, before everything went black, was Tommy's face, tears streaming, and the boy's voice breaking as he cried, Please don't die. Please, you have to know what happens. You have to see. Then nothing but darkness, and in that darkness a warmth like sunlight. Ruth's voice, soft and close, almost there, my love. Just hold on, just a little longer. You need to know how it ends. Harlan woke to Doc Henderson's face hovering above him, professional concern barely masking deeper worry. They were in an ambulance, sirens wailing. Elena sat beside him holding his hand. Tommy's face appeared in his blurred vision, the boy having apparently climbed in despite regulations. "Take me back," Harlan managed. "Have to? Here, you're going to the hospital," Doc said firmly. "No arguments. Take me back. Harlan, I'm dying anyway." His voice was barely a whisper, but absolute. "Let me die knowing, please." Doc looked at Elena, who was crying silently, looked at Tommy, who nodded fiercely, looked back at Harlan and saw something in those faded eyes that made him sigh. "God help me," Doc muttered. He leaned forward and told the driver, "Turn around." Back to the courthouse. "Sir, the patient needs immediate—" "I know what he needs. Turn around." So the ambulance returned to the federal courthouse, arriving at 1:50. Doc had called ahead. A medical team met them with a gurney and portable equipment. Judge Thornton, informed of the situation, agreed to deliver her ruling in a first-floor conference room rather than making Harlan climb stairs. They set up quickly. Harlan on the gurney, monitors attached, Doc standing ready with emergency medication. Elena and Tommy on one side. Sheriff Brunson had arrived and stood at the door like a guard. Tribal representatives filled the room, and Reeves, with his lawyers, watched everything with barely concealed fury. Judge Thornton entered at exactly 2:00, still in her robes, carrying a folder. She looked at Harlan on the gurney, and something flickered in her professional expression, compassion perhaps, or recognition of a man who'd given everything for what he believed. "Mr. Tate," she said, "I understand you insisted on being here for this ruling." "Yes, ma'am," Harlan whispered. "Then let's not waste time." She opened her folder. "This court has reviewed all testimony, examined all evidence, and considered all arguments. This is my ruling." The room went silent. Harlan felt Elena's hand tighten on his. The archaeological evidence is compelling and authenticated by qualified experts. The council stone and associated artifacts clearly establish this land as an indigenous sacred site. Under federal law, specifically the American Indian Religious Freedom Act and the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, such sites receive significant protection. Reeves shifted in his chair, jaw tight. Furthermore, Judge Thornton continued, the original 1887 town charter contained a preservation clause that has never been legally rescinded. The 1952 amendment presented by the plaintiff shows irregularities in filing and recordation. The signatures appear rushed, and the document was never properly incorporated into town meeting minutes. This court finds insufficient evidence that the amendment was validly enacted. Harlan felt his heart hammering. Too fast. Too hard, but he didn't care. Combined, these factors create what the law recognizes as permanent protection. The land in question, all 40 acres surrounding Mr. Tate's property, is hereby designated as protected sacred ground and wildlife sanctuary. No development, commercial or otherwise, may proceed. The land will be transferred to tribal trust management, with Mr. Tate retaining lifetime residence rights to his current 3-acre parcel. A cheer went up from the tribal representatives. Elena sobbed. Tommy pumped his fist in the air. Reeves stood abruptly. "This is outrageous." "We'll appeal." "You may certainly appeal, Mr. Reeves," Judge Thornton said coolly. "But I'll be frank. You'll lose. The law on this matter is clear, and I've documented my reasoning thoroughly. Additionally, I'm ordering your firm to pay all court costs and reasonable attorney fees to the prevailing parties. Your challenge to the sacred site designation was, in my opinion, filed in bad faith with insufficient legal merit." She looked at him directly. "You've wasted this court's time and caused significant distress to a dying man. I suggest you accept defeat gracefully." Reeves's face went red, but he said nothing more. His lawyers were already gathering papers, clearly recognizing they'd lost completely. Judge Thornton turned to Harlan. "Mr. Tate, this land is protected, permanently. What you helped preserve will remain for future generations." Harlan couldn't speak. Tears ran down his weathered face. He touched Ruth's ring and felt her presence so strongly it was as if she stood beside the gurney, her hand on his shoulder. "We did it," he whispered. "Ruth, we did it." Doc wanted to take him directly to the hospital, but Harlan insisted on going home first. Need to see them. The animals. Need to say goodbye. So the ambulance, followed by a convoy of vehicles carrying half the town, made the journey back to Mercy Springs. News had spread instantly via cell phones and social media. By the time they arrived, people lined the streets. Some waved. Some cheered. Some just stood in respectful silence. At Harlan's property, something had changed. The animals were leaving. Not in panic or fear, but calmly, naturally, as if released from duty. Deer drifted toward the hills. Rabbits scattered to burrows. The mountain lions stretched and padded away with feline grace. Birds took flight in groups, circling once before heading to their territories. By sunset, only a dozen animals remained. By the time Doc got Harlan settled on his porch, against all medical advice, but with the understanding that arguing was useless, only a handful lingered. The bear left with a last look back. The coyotes trotted away in formation. The elk bugled once and vanished into the scrubland, and then there was only one. The wolf. It sat at the edge of the property line, exactly where it had appeared that first night when Harlan had shared his last meal. Everyone else had gone inside or moved to a respectful distance. It was just Harlan and the wolf and the gathering darkness. The wolf stood and walked forward slowly. Came right up to the porch. Close enough for Harlan to see those intelligent yellow eyes, to remember the gaunt, desperate creature it had been weeks ago. Thank you, Harlan said softly, for choosing me, for trusting me. The wolf stepped up onto the porch, something it had never done before, came close enough to touch. Harlan reached out with a trembling hand and laid it on the wolf's head. The fur was warm, coarse, real beneath his fingers. Go on now, Harlan whispered. You've done enough. Go live your life. The wolf pressed its nose to Harlan's hand, gentle as it had been that first night, taking cornbread from his fingers. Then it touched its nose to the place on Harlan's chest where Ruth's ring rested. Harlan felt warmth spread from that point, not painful, but comforting. Like being wrapped in Ruth's arms one more time. The wolf stepped back, looked at Harlan with something that transcended animal intelligence. Then it turned and ran toward the hills, paused once on a distant ridge, silhouetted against the darkening sky, raised its head and howled, not mournful, not urgent, but triumphant, a song of completion. Then it was gone. Harlan sat alone on his porch, hands still raised in farewell, tears streaming freely. Goodbye, friend, he said to the empty landscape. Goodbye. Elena came out quietly, wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. Tommy sat on the step at his feet. Sheriff Brunson stood guard nearby. Doc monitored the machines that tracked Harlan's failing heart. We should get you to the hospital now, Doc said gently. Harlan, please. You need proper care. Harlan looked at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Touched Ruth's ring one more time. No, he said peacefully. I'm going to stay right here. In my home, on my land. However long I've got left, I'll spend it here. You could have weeks if you get proper treatment, or I could have tonight. Either way, I'll take it here, thank you. No one had the heart to argue with him. They set up what medical equipment they could, made him comfortable, and settled in for what might be a vigil. But Harlan felt no fear, no regret. He'd done what he was meant to do, saved what needed saving. Proved that kindness still mattered, still had power to change things. Not bad, he said softly, smiling at the stars. Not bad for an old cowboy who shared his last meal. Somewhere in the hills, a wolf howled one final time. And Harlan closed his eyes, content, at peace, complete. 3 weeks later, spring arrived in Mercy Springs with unusual gentleness. Wildflowers bloomed across the protected land. The scrubgrass greened. The air carried warmth without the harsh edge of summer to come. Harlan sat on his porch in the old rocking chair that had weathered as many years as he had. He was still thin, still weak, but no longer dying by inches. Proper meals delivered by a rotation of townspeople. Regular medical care from Doc Henderson, who'd given up arguing about hospitals. Rest, finally, after weeks of fighting. The land transfer to tribal trust had been completed with ceremony and paperwork. The 40 acres were now officially recognized as the Mercy Springs Sacred Gathering Ground and Wildlife Sanctuary. A beautiful painted sign marked the entrance. words in English and 3 indigenous languages announcing the land's protection. The archaeological survey continued. Dr. Patricia Reeves had established a small research station, employing 3 townspeople as assistants. They'd uncovered more pottery, stone tools, and what appeared to be the remains of a ceremonial structure. Each discovery added weight to what everyone already knew. This land held history, held meaning, held something that transcended property lines and economic development. The town had transformed in ways both visible and subtle. The flood of reporters had eventually receded, but a steady stream of respectful visitors remained. People came to see the sacred site, to walk the land that animals had chosen, to feel whatever it was that made this place different. They stayed in the reopened motel, ate at Mary's diner, bought supplies at Mrs. Chen's store. Money flowed into Mercy Springs, not in the millions Reeves had promised, but steadily, sustainably. More importantly, the town had found purpose. Mayor Hendricks, humbled by how close they'd come to selling their souls for development money, worked with the tribal council to plan an educational center. Not a tourist trap, but a place of learning, where children could understand indigenous history, ecological balance, and the value of preservation over profit. "It won't make us rich," Hendricks admitted at a town meeting, "but it'll make us something better. It'll make us worthy of what we've been given." Jobs came with the center's planning: researchers, educators, maintenance staff. Young people who'd left for cities began returning, seeing a future in Mercy Springs they hadn't imagined before. Tommy's mother, Elena, had been hired as the project coordinator. She'd quit her cleaning job in Albuquerque and now worked organizing the center's development. For the first time in years, she looked hopeful. Tommy visited Harlan every day after school. The boy had changed too, grown taller, more confident, full of questions and dreams. He wanted to study wildlife biology, he told Harlan. Wanted to understand the mysteries they'd witnessed. "You already understand the important part," Harlan said. "That kindness matters. That giving is more powerful than taking. The rest is just details." The animals had returned to their normal patterns. Deer grazed in the early morning. Rabbits bounded through the scrubland. Birds nested in the cottonwoods. But occasionally, people reported seeing them gathered in small groups, peaceful together in ways that didn't quite fit natural behavior. The land remembered, even if the urgent purpose had been fulfilled, and sometimes, always at dawn or dusk, a wolf appeared on the distant ridge. Watching, or so people said. No one could get close enough to confirm it was the same wolf, but Harlan knew. He felt it in his bones. His friend kept watch still, making sure the land stayed protected. Thomas Blackhorse visited regularly, bringing tobacco and prayers. He'd taken to calling Harlan brother, a title Harlan wore with humble pride. They'd sit together in comfortable silence. 2 old men who'd witnessed something neither could fully explain, but both deeply understood. "The young ones think it was magic," Blackhorse said one afternoon. "They want explanations, scientific or spiritual. But you and I know better." "What do we know?" Harlan asked. "That some moments exist outside explanation. That the world responds to genuine kindness in ways we've forgotten to recognize. That you did nothing more than be the man your wife knew you to be, and somehow that was enough to wake something ancient and beautiful." Harlan thought about that, touching Ruth's ring. "She knew," he said softly. "Ruth saw all this coming. Warned me about it even. Told me to give when I had nothing left. She sounds like a wise woman, the wisest I ever knew." One evening, Tommy arrived with something large wrapped in an old blanket. Elena helped him carry it up onto the porch. The boy was practically vibrating with excitement. "I made this in shop class," Tommy said, pulling away the blanket to reveal a rocking chair. Simple construction, pine wood, but sanded, smooth, and carefully assembled. "Mr. Patterson helped with the tricky parts, but I did most of it myself." Harlan stared at the chair, throat tight with emotion. "So when people visit," Tommy continued, "they have a place to sit. Next to you, because you shouldn't have to sit alone anymore." Elena's eyes shone with tears. "He worked on it every day for 3 weeks. Harlan reached out and touched the chair, feeling the smooth wood, the care in every joint. "It's beautiful, son. Most beautiful thing anyone's ever given me." They set it beside Harlan's old chair. 2 chairs, 2 seats, room for company, for community, for the future. That night, after Tommy and Eleanor left, after the other visitors departed, Harlan sat in his chair with the empty one beside him. The new chair that represented so much: Tommy's growth, the town's transformation, the end of Harlan's isolation. Doc Henderson had stayed late, checking Harlan's vitals one more time. "You're stable," he said with something like wonder. "I didn't think you'd make it this far, but you're actually stable. Might have years yet if you take care of yourself." "Might," Harlan agreed. "Or might not. But either way, I'm content." After Doc left, Harlan sat alone, but not alone. The land breathed around him. Somewhere, the wolf kept watch. And Ruth, he felt her presence as clearly as if she sat in that empty chair beside him. "We did it, my love," he said to the darkening sky. "What you saw in your dream. We made it real." The ring against his chest warmed, as it always did when he spoke to her. And in his mind he heard her voice, clear as morning. "I'm proud of you. So proud. You stayed kind when you had every reason not to. You stayed gentle in a world that rewards hardness. That's the real miracle, Harlan. Not the animals, not the stone. You, just you, being who you always were." Tears ran down his face, but they were good tears. Healing tears. He thought about the journey, from loneliness to purpose, from his last meal to abundance, from dying alone to living surrounded by community. One small act of kindness had changed everything, had saved not just the land but the town, had given Tommy direction and Elena hope, had reminded everyone that the old values still mattered, still had power. "Not bad," Harlan said softly, smiling at the emerging stars. For an old cowboy with nothing left to give, a breeze rose gentle, carrying the scent of spring flowers and desert sage. Somewhere distant, a wolf howled, just once, just enough. A greeting, a farewell, a promise that some bonds transcended explanation. Harlan closed his eyes and let himself rest, truly rest, for the first time in 3 years. No more fighting, no more struggle. Just peace deep and abiding. The chair beside him sat empty but ready. For visitors, for Tommy, for the future that would come whether Harlan lived to see all of it or not. He'd done his part, saved what needed saving, proved what needed proving. The rest would unfold as it was meant to. Life going on better than before because one man chose kindness when he had nothing else to give. And everything changed. Not just for him, but for everyone. For the land, for the animals, for the generations that would come after, who would walk this protected ground and maybe, just maybe, understand what their grandparents had learned, that giving creates more than taking. That kindness ripples outward forever. That one gentle act, done without expectation of reward, can wake something ancient and beautiful and transform the world. Harlan smiled as sleep took him, content and complete. At peace, finally, truly, perfectly at peace, in the hills. The wolf settled down to rest, its duty fulfilled, its purpose served. On the porch, 2 chairs waited, one holding a good man's dreams of rest, the other holding the promise of community yet to come, and the land breathed, sacred and protected, remembered and honored, alive with the echoes of kindness and the whisper of old ways waking.